Max, I'm recording. Thanks, Max, Marissa, and Catherine. And hello to everyone that's joining us. So I'm Stu. I'm the Head of Strategy and Research with the Amy Gillett Foundation. This is my colleague, Jen. We are really happy to be bringing this program to life all around the country. So we're based here in Melbourne, and of course we would like to pay our respects to the traditional owners, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. Always paying our respects to people, traditional owners, and just the land that you're on. As I said, this is a national program, so extending that nationally is really really humbling. So we are halfway through a very intense program of work. So this series that you've dialed into, that you've signed up for, is all about upskilling our sector in street design for people on bikes. So with this all started with Jen and I 18 months ago, where we framed up a program and we pitched it into the federal government, and they've agreed to fund it. And here we are, sort of halfway through the program. I think we've had over 700 people either through the training or signed up, which is just a brilliant proof of demand for this type of upskilling package. So we're just here very briefly before we hand over to Max and the team to say thanks for taking part. And also just nudging you towards the other parts of our program. So safecycling.org.au is where we host all of the content. And at the moment, the Bike Spot project is very live. So anywhere, any street or path or road in the country, you can drop a pin and tell us if you feel safe or unsafe on a bike and why. So bikespot.org is where you can do that. But I think it's probably time to let the pros do what they do and sort of take the reins. But thanks again for joining us. We really appreciate all of the support.
Excellent. Thank you, Stuart and Jen. Lovely to have you on board and provide that introduction. And of course, wonderful to be working hand in hand and providing this training opportunity for everyone involved today. So very excited to get stuck into some content. And we do just have a few administration practices, just so you've got an idea of exactly how these things will run over the next fortnight. But I similarly wanted to echo Stuart's comments there and acknowledge the traditional custodians on the lands that I'm also gathered on today, which is also the Wurundjeri lands, the Wurrung people. I'd like to pay respect to elders past and present, any of the First Nations people dialing in today as well. And we do have a variety of lands on which we are dialing in from, and I wanted to recognise that as the traditional custodians. So as touched on, because this is a national course, the way that we run the content is we don't focus on one specific jurisdiction. We have a look at different guidelines and policy documents that are implemented across Australia. And we've kind of just copied what we would see as best practice overall within a more national framework. So if you see things throughout today's slides and going forward that don't look quite relevant to your jurisdiction, rest assured what we're teaching here is just the principles. We're teaching the terminologies, we're teaching, best practice. All of that does need to be filtered and then translated into your specific jurisdiction. So like the way that, you color the pavement or the sign that's used, or, those kind of really detailed things, they may look a little bit different, but principle level, what we've got should be great information for you all. Now, I will share my screen and get stuck into some of the presentation for today. So our first module will be focusing on off-road cycling facilities. Now, when we do think about best practice cycling infrastructure, it's really hard to go past off-road facilities because riders very much appreciate being well and truly away from the carriageway. So that perception of safety plays a really big part on getting more riders actually using, these paths, or getting more people on a bike to start with. So if you've got the space available, implementing off-road facilities, generally they're used as shared paths, is certainly the gold standard and what you should be prioritizing. Particularly if you're looking at any of your strategic cycling corridors or your bicycle highways, or whatever you like to call them. These are really what we consider provide the greatest amenity for riders and also the greatest safety value as well. We are recording these sessions, so if you happen to drop out with internet, or you've got to attend an urgent meeting or go pick up the kids or anything like that, we're not going to mark you down for that. We understand that the real world does continue as we present in these sessions. All we ask you to do is, because we record this, we then upload this to our learning management system, which I'll speak to in a few minutes as well. And we just ask you to finish off the webinar as a recording, so you can just watch it at your own leisure. And if you have any questions at all, then you can just follow up after that session. Of course, we strongly encourage you to attend the live sessions, just so you've got that chance to mingle with other participants and ask your questions live and get that feedback. Okay, we do have our wonderful program moderator here, Marissa, and she's still got her internet connected, which is fabulous to see. So fingers crossed we continue this.
Still here for now.
Yeah, good. Would you like to do an introduction?
Yeah, thank you. My internet is a bit shaky, so bear with me today. If I disappear, I'll try and get back on, but fingers crossed. Hello, everyone, and welcome. I am here to help moderate today's session. My name is Marissa Garusto. I'm training coordinator at Safe Systems Solutions, helping out behind the scenes, helping all our wonderful participants get registered and enrolled onto the courses. Please contact me at any time. If you can't make a session, or if you have any technical issues or administrative issues, please get in contact. You can see my email address just there under my name, training@safesystemsolutions.com.au. Oh, it's there. Max is just going to highlight for you on the screen. Thank you, Max. But please get in contact for anything at all. During the chat, we absolutely encourage and love your interaction with us. If you do have any questions at all for us, we would really appreciate if you would pop them into the Q&A function. There is a Q&A function just down below there with those speech bubbles, which Max has just highlighted there again. Please pop your questions into the Q&A. There will be myself and Catherine behind the scenes answering your questions. There she is. She's giving us a little wave, and she'll introduce herself in a moment. But we also have the chat function there available for you to just provide any chat at any time during the sessions. You're welcome to chat with each other, and Max will often encourage you to answer any one of his trick questions he might have for you. So yeah, you're welcome to use the chat. But if you do have any question in particular that you would like answered from Max or Catherine, please pop that in the Q&A, and we will keep an eye on that throughout all of the sessions. All of the presentations throughout the next 4 modules will be available and are available to you on our learning management system, which Max will go through with you shortly. Hopefully you all received your login instructions that we sent over to you prior in the last week or so. Hopefully you all had a chance to log in and have a look at our learning management system. If you haven't had a chance to log into that, or if you're having any issues, again, please just let me know. And I can help you get set up for that one. I think that's about it for me.
Wonderful, Marissa. And I can see you're in a very colourful space behind you.
Oh,
Did you want to explain that?
Everybody loves my space. I'm in the prize pit. And why am I in the prize pit? Well, as I mentioned, Max loves your interaction. So do Catherine, and so do I. Max loves to give out prizes for any of the fun activities he does, or if you raise just an absolute banger of a question, and then he just wants to throw a prize at you, you can pick anything behind me, and promise we'll get it to you. No, we're not going to send you a Batman or a Superman, but we do have a wonderful little store of prizes that we like to send out and give to you guys. So that's why I'm in the prize pick, just for a bit of fun.
Perfect. Yeah. So make sure you're asking good questions and responding to questions that I might ask, because you're a chance to win a prize.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Marissa. I might now hand over to Catherine to do a brief introduction as well.
Hello, everyone, and welcome. This is a really exciting course. I'm always happy to be part of it. So as mentioned by Marissa and Max, I'm Catherine, and I'll be in the background trying to answer your questions as best as I can, as well as putting some crackers forward to Max. I'm the project development lead at Safe Systems Solutions. I've been part of the business now for 3.5 years. I've had some experience in the consultancy world, worked at Arup before here, also the local government world as well. And I've spent most of my career in Western Australia. So hello to everyone in WA, my hometown. And yeah, I've been in Victoria for the past 6 years, and I'm very fortunate to live in the beautiful part of northeast Victoria. So the cycling mecca, we just had the Bright cycling, what's it called? The Bright Tour de Bright, I should know that. Just last weekend. So yeah, I love cycling. I'm not a pro, but I certainly love it, and I think it's an amazing form of transport. And yeah, it's one of my hobbies, I guess. So welcome everyone, and I look forward to sharing this experience with you all. Thank you.
Wonderful introduction. Thank you, Catherine. This is myself there in the middle, Max McArdle, Engineering Operations Manager here at Safe Systems Solutions, and I'm regularly involved within the cycling infrastructure space, so reviewing different cycling projects that are going across Australia and providing kind of technical advice about how to maximize the level of safety for riders. Before that, though, I did also start my career within state government. I worked with the Department of Transport, or VicRoads as it was at the time, and I helped develop some of the cycling guidance documents, which coincidentally we will be going through in today's session. So when I mentioned their best practice, I know their best practice because I worked on them, but of course I would say that. Yeah, so I've got a bit of a public experience as well as the private consultancy sector as well. And yeah, really passionate cyclist. I just prefer to get around on 2 wheels, and I don't think it should be a mode of transport only for those that feel really confident. It should be freely accessible, and it should be encouraged so that people of all ages and ability are able to get on a bike and feel safe doing so. So really, really excited to deliver this program to see, improved, safer cycling networks across all of our jurisdictions. And finally, I'll mention Mr. Ken Beer. He is our principal engineer at Safe Systems Solutions. He's been involved within the training space for over 10 years now, and he also previously used to work at the Department of Transport, VicRoads. Lots of cycling experience with himself there, and he's helped to coordinate this course and ensure that we've got materials that reflect that best practice. Marissa.
And we've got someone who's mentioned, pointing out, where is Ken's moustache?
Oh,
yes.
That's such an old photo. Good point.
I know.
I'm gonna
have to draw it on.
That's a prize there.
Yeah.
That's how easy it is to win a prize.
That's how easy it is. Yeah.
Yeah. Ken has a wonderful handlebar mustache now.
We're going to have to get an updated photo for those who don't know. Yeah.
How did we miss that?
It's just so funny. Now looking at it, it does look like a different person.
It's his signature look, isn't it? The moustache.
Very good. Well picked up. So that's the intros. A few more administrative things, and then we'll get stuck into contents. We have a learning management system. You should have received a link from us, from the training team, about joining our LMS. This is where all our resources, the webinar recording, all of the actual coursework, so things that we grade you on, is hosted on here. So we don't go back and forth via email or anything like that. It's just too confusing. Everything's hosted on there. If you've done university, within the last 10 years or something like that, very, very similar function. So it's just like an online learning platform where just everything is stored. So if you haven't received your email to sign up to that, or you're having any troubles at all, please reach out to the training team, because it's really important for you to be able to complete this course and get your certificate. Now, just to ensure that we've got all participants focused as much as they can on this particular coursework that we're going through, and not, looking at other things and doing a little bit of origami or making a macaroni cheese sandwich or something like that. We want to make sure that we've got you engaged in this session. And what we've done very sneakily is, this is our friend Wally, and Wally hides in the slides. So it's your job as a participant just to keep a tally, just get a little piece of paper and make a note of how many times you see Wally. And the reason for that is because at the end of today's module, there'll be a very simple question, which will be, how many times did you see Wally? And it's kind of a way that we can ensure that we're ensuring that we're getting eyes on this screen and not focus on other tasks. So just to confirm, this one is not included in the count. So you're currently at 0 Wallies, but he will be making an appearance. So keep your eyes out. We do have some core competency requirements, so some benchmark requirements that you do need to demonstrate that you've achieved certain skills in order to complete this course. So some of them are attending all the webinars. As I mentioned before, ideally we'd love to see you in a live fashion, just so you've got that aspect of co-mingling with peers and being able to ask any of your questions live and hopefully answered live as well. But if you're unable to do that, then just ensuring that you catch up on that webinar in your own time. You need to complete all your set tasks. So we've got 2 quizzes and 2 assignments, one of which involves a site visit. I'll explain each kind of little coursework per module rather than just do everything at the moment. So today's coursework will just be a quiz, and I'll go through that at the end. We also have a minimum pass mark, which is 80%, which is pretty high. So certainly much higher than when I was at university. And the reason that we've kind of set that quite high benchmark is because, well, 2 reasons. We haven't made the content, especially complex, and, you need to design a new bicycle path from scratch and do all the drainage and things like that. We just want to focus on you using the right terminology. You understand the safety implications of different designs and hazards and things like that. So we've kept it at a fairly principle-based level. And the other reason that it's so high is, like, we want to ensure that people that go through this course can really demonstrate that they have improved skills within the cycling infrastructure space. So it's just a way for us to feel comfortable that those going through this course are able to, clearly demonstrate that they've got that skill set. Now, of course, multiple submissions are allowed. So you are allowed up to 3 attempts per different coursework. So my advice would be is, if you're not meeting that minimum benchmark on your first attempts, we will provide you feedback. But if that's not clear, then by all means, get in touch with us. We're happy to have a phone call or a Teams meeting, and we can go through that content that wasn't clear. Because at the end of the day, we are failing as facilitators or educators if we are failing any of our participants. It's just indicative that we're not explaining things in a way that is understandable. So we want to ensure that we're passing everyone. So please reach out if you are having any trouble. Now, I don't like speaking for long stints without getting engagement. So my first little engagement piece is just a simple poll which I'll get Marissa to launch. And for those that have never done polls before, hopefully you can see something that's launched on your screen. For those that haven't seen it, don't stress. I'll just read out the question, and in the chat you can put your answer. The question is, please rate your level of cycling infrastructure knowledge. And there's 4 answers, 4 responses. Very knowledgeable, knowledgeable, aware but don't know much, and not aware. So hopefully you can see that poll, but if not, just pop it in the chat. You're not marked on this at all. Like, this doesn't go towards that 80% grade that I spoke about before. This is just to get a little bit of information about those that are currently joining us. And it's also handy for me that for those people that said very knowledgeable and my internet goes out, then I'll just make you the host and you can go through the slides. Just kidding, of course. That will continue on. I'll give it another minute or so while I just run through the agenda. But if you could fill that in, that'd be terrific. Today, as I mentioned, we're focused on off-road facilities. Generally, that looks like a shared path. So shared means sharing with other users, pedestrians, people in wheelchairs, everything like that. And we'll look at specific design elements of a shared path. So things like the width of the facility, how gradient can impact on things, some common hazards that we see, adjacent shared paths, sight lines, as well as fencing. Inevitably, our off-road connections eventually cross over a carriageway. So we do have a conversation around how do we manage that conflict with general traffic, and how do we ensure that safety is prioritized for people that are using the shared path, as opposed to always just giving priority to carriageway users. Now, we have just ended that poll there, so that should have dropped from your screen, but don't worry, there'll be other opportunities to contribute. Finally, the last part of today's session will just be discussing shared paths crossing other shared paths. In particular, we'll have a chat through wayfinding signage and managing the speeds at those conflict points. So there's a bit of content to get through, and I want to do a little demonstration of our LMS as well. So I will just get stuck straight into it now and encourage you, please, any questions in the Q&A, and just keep all the chat into the chat as well. That'd be terrific. So shared path design. I've taken this photo. This is along the Esplanade area within Melbourne, close or within the Melbourne CBD here. And it's actually not an example of a shared path, so I can cross that one out. Because this facility here, where we can see our riders, that's actually an exclusive bicycle lane. So only riders are meant to use that facility. And pedestrians, they get to have a meandering walk much closer to the waterfront. And yeah, there's those 2 clearly defined areas for riders and pedestrians. And the reason that we've included this is because at this location, we've got significant high volumes of pedestrians and riders. So where you've got really, really high concentration of riders and pedestrians, it's actually not recommended to do a shared path, because you'll have riders traveling at speed, trying to kind of weave in and out of pedestrian traffic, which increases the risk of riders colliding with pedestrians or other users, but also riders colliding with oncoming riders if they were overtaking and things like that. So this is just something that we can always think of, you know, at the back of our mind, where if we are really anticipating significant volumes of pedestrians or riders, cyclists, rather than just giving them one shared facility, can we instead, you know, try to separate the 2 users, because they do have 2 different ways of interacting with the environment. Now, I did say that it's meant to operate in that sense, because I've spent a lot of time riding up and down this section, and I can certainly tell you anecdotally that pedestrians definitely spend a lot of time walking along the exclusive bike path as well. So it's not like 100% compliance is achieved just by this type of design, but it's a good principle to have. So if you've got significant volumes, and just to help you make that decision where, well, what would be considered as, significant volumes, the Austroads Guide to Road Design Part 6A. I'll also just make a note here that whenever we do make any reference to figures or even Google Street View images or things like that, we provide a reference. So if you wanted to double check where this figure came from or what's the context of it, or in case you don't believe me, you can do your own research. We do provide our sources, so it's handy for you just to do your own investigation. This is one of the main documents that you would be looking at if you were doing any of your shared path design. So ADID Part 6A. And within this figure here, on the y-axis, what we've got is the number of pedestrians two-way per peak hour, which is such a mouthful to say. It's basically just saying how many people have you got walking in there. And along the x-axis is the number of cyclists two-way per peak hour. Once again, volumes, okay? And if we just look at the far extremities of this graph, so as high as we get for cyclists and as high as we get for peds there, you can see this figure is actually recommending two separate facilities. So it's saying, let's do a 4-meter wide bike path and a 4-meter wide footpath. It's not suggesting that we share the facility because there's just too many people. It's just too high a concentration, and it's not going to be a comfortable experience for pedestrians or for cyclists. So let's try and give them their individual space. The common kind of 3-meter wide shared path, you can see that that's really where it's being recommended. But as soon as pedestrian volumes get kind of above that 100 points during the peak, then it is recommended to look at trying to provide separation in between those two users. Another way that we can look to recommend a specific width that we should be adopting for our shared path is taken from this table here. And there's kind of 3 categories given, which is local access path, regional path, recreational path. Now, unfortunately, the Austroads Guide does a pretty terrible job at actually succinctly defining what each of these paths look like. There's some generic cross sections which provide some dot points around it, and I'll go through that, but it really is a little bit open from interpretation. It's not quite as tight as, I've got an engineering background, so I like things to be a bit more unambiguous. But the local access path, in layman's terms, just think of it as your local streets. So if you're considering your road network, it's basically only going to be used to support the movement within a local context. So you're not connecting, significant corridors. You're not having a large throughput of shared path traffic there. It's likely only going to be for residential use in that specific area. The minimum width that they're actually suggesting there is 2 meters, but I really want to caveat that, where that should really only be utilized where there's no other options, because the 2-meter wide shared path is a really uncomfortable environment for riders and for pedestrians. So in the photo that we've got there, that's an example of a 2-meter wide shared path. And the fact that we've got signs and utility poles and even the fence there, all of those features actually narrow that path further So riders don't even get access to that full 2 meters. And in fact, if you have a look at just these two people walking two abreast, there's no space there whatsoever for a rider to safely pass or access that space. So be very, very mindful of just accepting minimums as the go-to. It should be the other way around. We should be going to our maximums, and then where we're unable to meet that, then providing solid evidence to help support that case. So local access, local streets, that's how I kind of tie it together. Regional path, within the Vic Roads Traffic Engineering Manual, it actually changes this term to a commuter path, just a different word, but it is much more of that throughput of traffic. So these are more like arterial roads, if you were thinking of the transport network again. And this is when you've got larger widths as well. Now, this is really where the different definition between regional and recreational is not incredibly well articulated within the Austroads guides. There's a little bit of wording to say that a recreational path may not just have the commuter traffic, so that kind of Monday to Friday flow and heavy concentration, but also attracts all users, all times of the day. They'll have parents with prams going to the adjacent playground and things like that, and have more of a recreational feel to it. But as I said, there's a bit of a fine line in between those two descriptions there. But generally that 3 meter wide path seems to be a pretty consistent standard that we would see across our networks. I might pause there and check in with Catherine to see if we've got any questions.
Hello, Max. Yes, lots of questions, which are great. I feel like we're getting through them. But there is a very good question here around pedestrian and cycle volumes and how they're determined and modelled. So how are volumes of pedestrians and cyclists determined and modelled? I suspect that construction of bike facilities would increase volume from existing. And speaking to the graph you were talking to earlier, Max.
Yeah, no, very good question. And that's a prize there. So we'll give a prize out to that person there. Yes, absolutely. So as part, if you were doing, say, a business case and you wanted to upgrade existing facilities or just install a new cycling network, it's likely that you would have to do some kind of modeling to suggest what volumes you are anticipating. And those are done by, fairly high level assumptions are made, and there's some degree of calculations that go into it, and then spits out a number to say that we're expecting X number of pedestrians per hour and things like that. The more existing data that you've got in surrounding networks can be very helpful to help provide evidence to why that number is being recommended. But at the end of the day, it is an assumption that is being made. And if I was, doing any of this business case development, I'd just be sure to include any of those assumptions, so it's clear exactly how I calculated the expected population, and then, using that as a metric. But to your second point there, saying that if you were to upgrade facilities, would that likely involve an increase in the participation? And I would suggest yes, particularly if it's, a really, really narrow shared path, like a footpath that's being upgraded to a 3 meter wide facility. I would expect to see increased volumes there. Good question.
I think also just making a point that we do very well at collecting data on traffic, but when it comes to pedestrians and cyclists, we don't do too well at collecting data for those modes of transport.
Yes, no, that's right. So there is some traffic count data that is available. Bicycle Network do the Super Count Tuesdays and things like that, which has got some pretty distinct points where those counts are made, but certainly not to the same extent that we do count our traffic data. it's also interesting. I've thought about this a while, but we've got, traffic detector loops that measure traffic volumes as they're going through signalized intersections. Surely we could just put bicycle detector loops and then just count every cyclist that goes through that intersection as well. Or maybe it does do that. If anyone knows that, you get a prize as well. Do you know if they do that, Catherine? Do the bicycle detector loops do that?
Yeah, I'm not too sure around intersections. I'm sure there are. I mean, we've got obviously the detector loops to detect whether a cyclist is there at an intersection to trigger the bicycle lanterns. But I know Metro Count do a lot of the tubing, permanent tubing for off-road facilities, so for shared use paths. I'm not too familiar though of them being in the carriageway, so be good to know.
Right, okay, got some interesting feedback in the chat as well. So thank you for helping shed some light on that.
Thanks, everyone. And that's it, Max. I'll let you carry on.
Thank you very much, Catherine. So we'll get stuck into the gradients now. Once again, this is a figure from the Austroads Guide. And what we're actually looking at is what would be considered a reasonable uphill grade for a rider. And myself, if you've read the introduction on the LMS, I don't like hills at all. I don't like riding up hills. I will go out of my way. I'll pick a flatter route, even if it means another 15, 20 minutes to my journey, because I just do not have the stamina or motivation to tackle hills. Lots of riders are very different in that regards, but I take it quite easily. And this graph basically represents my sentiment, which is how steep can shared path facilities become, and how long can you make that facility before it's just like riders won't use that and it's just not worth doing, or you should be looking at flattening that out. So the way that we read this is we've got the length of the gradients. So the gradient is just the slope, the steepness. And along the X, we've got the gradient as a percentage. I'll just pick one as an example, and I'll say a 10% gradient, and that is really, really steep. Like you would notice that even driving a car, 10% gradient is very steep. If we had a 10% gradient, what would be deemed kind of desirable would be to limit that to about 10 meters there. So that desirable line there is the solid line. What may be acceptable is that dotted line, which looks to be around 25 meters or something like that. So that's just giving you an indicative range of how riders would actually feel going up a 10% grade and how much you should limit that, because you don't want to make it too far. Riders won't use it, or they have to get off their bike and push it up and things like that. Now, that is, of course, thinking about uphill grade, but we also need to think about, well, if it's a shared path, it's very likely that riders will be accessing that in the reverse direction, which could be traveling downhill. Now, I've given this example here, and I'll give you a chance to provide your feedback in the chat. And the question that I've got, so this is an overpass structure, and riders kind of travel along here. And if you put yourself in the position of a rider right at this point here, so they're just at the top of that ramp, and they're going to head down this ramp to continue the shared path. What are some of the risks or hazards you can see in these photos that may increase the risk of a collision? So I'll give you 30 seconds to have a think about what are some of the risks or hazards for a rider about to set off, ride downhill in this environment. Pop it in the chat, please. All right, so I can see lots of exciting answers coming through. It's great to have this engagement and some similar themes coming as well. Wow, it's going to be hard to go through all of them, so I might just pick out a few. One of them that I noticed a few people mentioning is the landings. So the ramp, if I was to draw this in a cross section or an elevation profile, it kind of looks like you've got the ramp that goes down, then a landing, ramp, landing, ramp, landing, kind of like that. That's obviously exaggerated. And the reason that we do this is for our DDA requirements. So we need to provide those for people within wheelchairs so that they can safely access this feature. Some riders think that that significantly affects their ability to travel within there. And yes, if you are riding at speed, it is relatively uncomfortable. But that's the other point that I really wanted to make is if you were kind of at the top of that ramp and you just let your brakes go and let gravity take over and push you down there, it's very likely that you'd be able to pick up pretty significant speed. You'd probably be traveling like 25, 30 kilometers per hour by the time you got to the bottom of the ramp, by the toe. And what a few other people have mentioned, I can see, is, well, we've actually got a conflict point here because we've got another shared path that actually joins in at this location. And that's not great design, really, because where you've got the conflict point, you don't really want to have those high speeds. The other issue with this location, and I've also seen this mentioned, is because you've got this lovely facade that's being used for the handrail there, that actually acts as a sightline impediment. So as you're riding down, it can be quite challenging to see a rider that could be accessing the shared path adjacent, difficult to make eye contact with them, and also a bit confusing as to who gives right away. So who gives way to who's got priority. So all of those factors kind of lead to this where you've got high speeds, you've got the confusion of priority. It's difficult to see other users at that conflict point. This is, you know, a significant kind of concern. And that is just a testament to thinking about things, not just from how riders experience things going uphill, but how they experience things going downhill, which is often overlooked. And this one, we actually audited as part of the construction of this project, and it's looks different to this now. And a recommendation was made to actually just move that conflict point further out, where sight lines are much more open and where you've got much reduced speed, because you're no longer putting the conflict point where riders are right at the bottom of the downhill where they've got all that speed. You're putting it somewhere where they've managed to wipe off some of that speed. So just ways that you can look to mitigate that. You want to make sure you've got your sight lines all set up and hopefully reducing your speeds. Now, I'll have a chat about our cyclist envelope. So just like for those that have ever done any traffic engineering or road design, things like that, you'd know that we do have envelopes for general traffic. We've got envelopes for heavy vehicles and buses and B doubles and all that kind of thing, which is, by envelopes, I just mean like the width that they need, how much space they require. We also have that for riders. So the operating width of a rider is very conveniently taken as 1 meter. So it's pretty easy to remember. However, there is a note to say that if a rider is actually traveling uphill, then they're pretty likely to take up more width, because it's pretty common for them to do this like wobbling motion where they go left and right with their handlebars. That's just to get some momentum to get up the hill. So that operating width may extend to 1.5 meters, but generally as a rule of thumb, that 1 meter operating width is used. In terms of clearance, this is the head clearance, so from the top of the rider to fixed permanent object. 200 mil is used. Now, depending on which jurisdiction that you are in, this is from New South Wales. Other jurisdictions may use 500 mil. Yeah, there's a little bit of discrepancy there depending on which part of the country you're from. But yeah, 200 mil. And where that's most relevant is things like if a shared path goes underneath the carriageway, it's like an underpass type of scenario. Even things like vegetation and branches that are overhanging a path, you know, that kind of measurement can be used to help identify if there's any risks there. The other important feature of this envelope to note is, what do we consider a hazard adjacent the operating width of the rider? And generally it is 0.5 meter. So anything from the edge of the operating width of the cyclist to where that hazard is, that kind of offset, 0.5 meter, is what we take as, you know, there could be risk involved for the rider if they are to strike that feature, or they're, you know, straying from the edge of the path and they're actually going to collide with that. That 0.5 meter is used there. The 0.2 meter minimum that you're seeing there, that is really only applicable if that feature is actually designed for riders to collide with. So things like cycle-friendly fencing, which we will have a chat about shortly. But generally 0.5 meter, and I'll show you exactly how that is measured in the next slide. I've also included this little diagram here. This is from the Global Designing Cities Initiative, Global Street Design Guide. And we have actually provided a link to this resource on our LMS. We haven't given you the resource itself. It's about 600 pages or something like that. And it's, or maybe, sorry, 300 pages, 600 meg. It's huge. But it's basically looking across the world how different jurisdictions design their bike facilities, and it's comprehensive. It's really, really a wonderful resource. We've actually got someone from GDCI give a little bit of a background speech of what they do and all that type of stuff. It's on there on the LMS as well if you'd like more information, but strongly recommend you go to their website, download the resource. We haven't provided it also because they like to keep a track of who is downloading this and what country they're from and all that type of thing. So we didn't take that marketing opportunity off them, but worth getting in touch with that resource. We are not paid by them or anything like that. We have no sponsorship deal. This is generally just a pretty exciting resource, and lots of good figures. Useful if you're doing any community engagement and you want to, you know, present why you're doing certain things. There's some really good stuff in there. Anyway, went on a bit of a tangent. This figure is just indicative what are common speeds for different riders. Yeah, we'd probably use different terms where we are. For instance, this commuter rider, I would swap those two terms over. I would put the commuter as traveling faster than the recreational. But anyway, it's just indicative. So you've got some kind of idea of generally how fast different user groups tend to be traveling. Back onto my hazards, and I spoke about, you know, that 0.5 meter offset from the edge of the rider's operating width. And if we look at the right photo, the way that we typically measure this in practice is it can be difficult to say, well, where is the operating width of a rider looking at this shared path? And just in practice, the way that we tend to measure it is we take the edge of the shared path. Anything that's within 0.5 meter, that's fixed, that's rigid, that could be a snagging hazard, we consider that a risk for our riders. So this utility pole that is very conveniently masked by that vegetation is in a precarious situation or position there for riders. Because if a rider happens to lose concentration and strays off the path just at that instance, it's very, very likely that they would strike that or hit their handlebar and just snag on that, potentially causing injuries there. So that is how we measure our half meter to determine if it's a hazard or not. Some other really common hazards that we do see there is drop-offs. So this is an example of a concrete shared path that has been installed. Likely the contractors have used a bit of formwork there to get the concrete nice and level. Then they've taken away the formwork and that's it, job done. Unfortunately, that does then leave this drop-off where riders that do come off the path there are very unlikely to be able to safely access the path again. So instead, what we recommend here is just ensuring that you're always battering up to the surface. And that just means just using soil or fill material just to build up to the top of your concrete path. So there's none of that drop off. I've done this the other way. I've started from right to left. But anyway, the left-hand photo now is a bin, which is also regularly found across recreational paths and things like that. But a really good example of where we could have just done some bit of analysis and thought, well, maybe I'll put the post on the other side here, just to give riders a little bit more leeway, and so they don't have to worry about that one as a hazard. But just taking into account the hazard that I looked at there with the utility pole, a way that we could treat that. Of course, if we are able to remove that as a hazard, that is our primary. That's if we look at the way that we mitigate our risks, anything that removes the hazard is considered the best outcome. But it's also not uncommon just to apply some kind of flexible bollards or use some line marking or things like that, just to help to demarcate that there is a hazard there. And so this is another example where the shared path is narrowing due to this. This is a gantry sign post that hangs out of the carriageway. And once again, ideal world, during the design phase, you probably would have picked this up. The shared path has to narrow there and thought, well, maybe let's just push this feature into the embankment there and build some retaining walls so that we can keep that nice consistent width. But if you are working within environments where you're just looking at retrofitting and trying to make things a little bit safer, these kind of flexible paddles or any delineation device there to help demarcate that. Now, looking at the time, I think I might pause here and give everyone a chance to get up and have a stretch or go and get a glass of water or a cup of coffee or a tea. And I'll get back into our content in 4 minutes. So you've got 4 minutes just to take a break, and I'll see you in 4 minutes. All right, welcome back. And Catherine, any questions pop up?
Hello. Just got back at the same time. How was that?
Good timing.
Yes. Just to clarify, is a barrier curb considered a hazard within 0.5 meters?
A good question. Let's give a prize out there.
Correct.
So by the letter of the law, you could claim it as a hazard, but what you'd really be thinking of is what is the level of risk that poses. So if a rider was to collide with that, what is the level of severity that you're expecting or the likelihood of that occurring? I do actually talk about curb profiles in our next module, so we can have a bit more of a discussion around that in module 2. But yeah, there is an argument to say that even barrier profile curbs to pose a risk when it's within that half meter tolerance there.
Great. Thank you, Max. And just another question. If all types of micromobility devices are allowed on a shared path, how safe is it for pedestrians to be on the same path? Is there any studies done to assess the safety of pedestrians?
Great question. Another prize out there, Marissa. Getting very enthusiastic with my prize giving today. So in terms of micromobility, like we all understand that this is a growing industry, and we're certainly seeing our shared paths being utilized by these types of devices. Different jurisdictions have kind of different ways that they treat this and ways that they view this. So it's not really a national approach that we view our e-mobility devices. In terms of, should we be providing separate facilities exclusive from them? I mean, principally, absolutely, I can agree with that. But being a bit of a pragmatist as well, and reflecting on the fact that we do have existing constraints, what our existing road reserve looks like, or from property line to property line, how things look, I think that would be incredibly difficult to be able to provide pedestrian facilities, rider facilities, e-bike facilities, e-scooter, e-skate bike. It's just incredibly challenging even to do pedestrians and riders. So my opinion is it's likely that they will continue to be using the shared path. But perhaps there's greater restrictions imposed on things like speed, or perhaps there's even enforcement programs to ensure that speeds are managed and you're not getting significantly high volumes of high-speed e-mobility devices using shared paths. But it is just one of those spaces that I guess we're going to see a lot more written and a lot more study being completed within this space. I couldn't point you to an existing study, sorry, that would help to provide more information here. But that's just my take on it.
Thanks, Max. And yes, I guess as e-bikes become more affordable to people, that's also going to be a popular mode of travel too. And the challenges will be there on shared use paths. Just one more question for you, Max, before we move on. Are you able to clarify the essential manoeuvring space for a cyclist? Is it 200 mil?
So I'm not overly familiar with that term. I might have to double check that one offline. Sorry,
Yeah,
I
sure.
can't answer that one live.
No, all good.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks, Max.
That's okay. It's always good to stump me, so I like to learn as well.
Me too.
We'll move on to sightlines now, and I've put this little slide in here just for those who are in the design space, and perhaps you've done your sightline calculations for other modes like stopping sight distance for general traffic or minimum sight gap distance, all those fun calculations. So just wanted to make you aware that there are sightline calculations for riders as well. And it's very, very similar process for how the calculation comes about. So you need to know things or make assumptions about your rider's speeds. You take the worst case scenario for friction, which is during wet conditions, and then the grade of the path. And then this will give you your horizontal sightline requirements, so that you can determine how far does a rider need to see in advance to spot a hazard, and how much space should you provide adjacent the shared path and remove obstacles to ensure that that sightline check is maintained throughout a shared path corridor. Anecdotally, I would just say, like, these checks tend to be done at the highest risk locations, maybe like hairpin bends and things like that. And it's pretty common that they're not met. So you'd have to think about, well, what else can I do to help ensure that sight lines, I'm not going to be able to meet them. What else can I do? And maybe that's slowing down riders. But just to talk about this, against a figure instead, so hopefully it gives you a bit more appreciation of what I'm on about here with sight lines, is if I've got a rider here that is traveling on a shared path, and I could have a hazard or an object that is blocking that shared path. It could be a log that's fallen down, or it could be another rider that's fallen and injured themselves and things like that. What we don't want to happen is there's not enough space for the rider to emergency brake and stop prior to colliding with that hazard. We want to ensure that the sight lines are there so they're able to perform that safely. Now, just as an example, this is an example of a shared path. This is asphalt. It looks like gravel, but that's actually sealed. And because of this vegetation that we've got going on, that's clearly grown and grown and grown over the years, anything that's around that bend is pretty well obstructed. So if there was a significant hazard occurring around here, a rider could be traveling along here and maybe only spot that halfway around the bend, limiting their ability to be able to stop in time. So they might have to run off the path or collide with that hazard. So that's the reason that you're doing that check, is just to basically ensure that you've managed to mitigate that as a risk. I'll spend a bit of time now on fencing. So once again, we'll talk about two different types of fencing categories. And the way that they're referred to within the Austroads Guide is this idea of a partial barrier fence or a full barrier fence. And where we typically apply them is either when we've got a significantly steep drop-off, so a vertical drop, or there's a really, really steep batter, like a cliff. So just to demonstrate how you would read this, our X is the measurement of the distance from the edge of the path to where that drop-off starts. And the Y is just the height of that drop-off. So the first kind of note that we're seeing within that table is a fence is not required where X is less than 2 meters and Y is less than 250 mil. And the reason that a fence is not required then is because instead we want to batter off the surface. So we want to just fill in that gap there with some type of material, because that would be a better outcome than putting in the fence. A partial barrier fence would be required where you've got a drop-off between 250 mil to 2 meters, and 2 meters is huge. Like, that is a big drop-off. And a full barrier fence is 2 meters and above. I'll show you pictures of what those two classifications of fences look like. I just thought I'd go through these tables first. Similarly, I'll just run through how we read our battering fence requirement graph as well, or table. So a fence is not required where X is less than 1 and Z is greater than 8. Z is referencing the run. So for those who remember their gradient calculations back in high school, or they've done any of these batter calculations, you know that they kind of do a rise over run terminology. It's usually referred to as a 1 in 10 grade or things like that. Basically, if it's greater than 1 in 8, it's pretty flat, so don't worry about putting in a fence. Partial barrier may be required where Z is 1 to 3, and if it's 1 to 1, that's very, very steep. Then you would be requiring a full barrier fence. Now, the way that those two classifications are separated is our partial barrier fence basically have these little windows, right? So theoretically, someone could fall through those gaps. And interestingly, 2 weeks ago when presenting this in this course, we had a rider who said that their daughter fell through one of those gaps. So it's, to me, I've always found it confusing that have these two hierarchies of fences when it just seems overly complicated, and the risk still exists within this environment, albeit, you know, you are certainly reducing the risk, but you still do have that possibility of falling through that fence. A full barrier fence, which is shown on the bottom image there, is, you know, full of vertical members, so it's impossible to fall through that. Of course, you could still fall over the top of it, but quite unlikely for that to occur. So that's the two different definitions of those fences. As I mentioned, I'm not a big fan that they've got these two different types, but that's just currently what we've got. So I thought I'd run you through it. And the other thing that's really quite crucial within any fencing design is this smooth rail. So you can also see it's listed in both of those cross sections, smooth deflection rail. And this is a deliberately installed continuous rail that juts out in front of the fence. So riders' handlebars are not colliding with any of those vertical members or any of the brackets or anything like that. In fact, the way that they are actually designed is if you've got a rider on their bicycle, that smooth deflection rail is at the height of a rider's elbow to their shoulder, so that part of their arm, which just means that if they were to come off the path and collide with this feature, that part of their arm would collide with the fence, making it much more likely that they'll stay on their bike because their handlebar isn't snagging. So very, very important. Any fences that you're proposing adjacent your shared path would have that smooth deflection. And I can also see, I think I saw it in the chats, it's kind of went in front of me very, very quickly, but the note here that the sign has been installed on the inside of the path, meaning theoretically, if you were riding and you collided with the deflection rail, it's basically going to guide you straight into that pole, which is not a good outcome. So if you are doing any of this type of work, just ensuring that that sits on the outside of your fence, so you don't have that kind of pinch point for riders there. Give a prize out there for the person that noticed that. That's good eagle vision. Okay. Now, longitudinal fences, we've already spoken about this. This is just more of a figure way of looking at things. We don't really like to see any fences that kind of curve inwards. They can also have that head clearance issue. Anything sharp, obviously. Low fences or things like planter boxes, they can actually create a pedaling risk where the riders pedal, actually strike that. That kind of distance that you're talking about there is basically anything above 200 mil could become a pedaling risk. So another thing just to be mindful of, if you've got any of those kind of low features, they could be considered a hazard as well. All right, I've done lots of talking and I'm going to open up another poll now, and we're going to look at this specific site. So this is a real shared path, and I'll move the banner down so you can have a bit more of a look. And the question that I've got for the group, which the poll will ask you, it's just opened up: should fencing be installed along this shared path? And I'll draw out exactly what I'm talking about there. You can see some people have already answered. That's okay. I'm talking about a fence that kind of looks like this. Do you reckon we should be recommending that? Or if you were doing this design or reviewing this existing condition, would you be saying, yep, let's do a fence, or no? I also saw a question in there about the shy line effect. Was that you about to ask that, Catherine?
Yeah, that's
I
it. Yeah.
stole it from you.
Oh, no, all good. You go for it, Max. It's a
Okay,
good
no worries.
question, hey?
A good question. We'll give a prize out there as well for the shy line effect. So
Dave.
what that refers to is maybe, I guess I can draw it on this image, but if I was riding close to the edge of the shared path and near the fence, it's actually very, very common for riders to deliberately position themselves further away because they don't like the feeling of getting too close to this feature. We have the same phenomenon with drivers when a roadside barrier is installed too close to the edge of the traffic lane. They tend to position themselves over towards the center line more. Same things happens with bicycles. And the way that you aim to mitigate that as a risk is similarly with what we do with roadside barriers, is providing a splay. So a splay would just mean, pretty difficult to draw it on this image, but if you had a shared path that looked like that, and then that is the fence that you're proposing, the start or end of your fence, you'd splay. So it looks like that. So it kind of provides a more comforting angle for riders. It's got this, yeah, great question though. Okay, we might share the results there and end the poll. And I'm seeing 99% of people saying that we don't require a fence. And I would be one of those 99% as well. For the people that said the 1%, perhaps we do need fence. Well, you may have been thinking about this poll, and you know that I spoke about before that that half-meter offset from the edge is considered a hazard, and I didn't give you the dimension of that, so perhaps that was your concern. But generally, you just kind of think about, well, what are the odds of a rider colliding with any of those features, or if they are to exit the path, it's much more likely that they're just going to ride onto vegetation, onto grass, which is very insignificant severity. So it's not what I would consider a high risk scenario, and not necessarily one where we'd be prioritizing to put a fence. But it's good to have that feedback. Now, the other reason that we included this slide is for you to have a look at what's going on where the shared path crosses over with a carriageway. So this is a divided carriageway. We've got traffic and then traffic over on the other side as well. We've also got some light rail or some trams just to make it extra challenging. And this is a median opening. So this is where vehicles can do a right turn into the adjacent street, which is wayfinding signage there, Woolton Avenue, or do a U-turn or things like that. But there is clearly a conflict point where we have got road users, as in general traffic users, conflicting with those on the shared path. And the way that this is managed at this location is we have got a raised crossing point. So that is a really, really fantastic outcome, and something that we really strongly encourage and recommend as part of all our shared paths crossing over roads. The raised crossing point physically slows down motorists. So if you just put up a give way sign with some line marking, it's very, very possible that motorists won't see that or will ignore it. If you put a speed hump in a motorist's travel path, it's much, much more likely they will yield to shared path users crossing at that location. So we love to see that this is a raised point and that priority is awarded to shared path users. So if you are riding through this section you're not forced to pause and wait at this location and give way to traffic. You've got this one continuous stretch. And I should say, like, this is a, I don't know, 2-kilometer stretch of bike path that looks exactly like this. And at every opening, you do have that continuous riding facility. So you're not forced to yield. In other sections you are, but not this. So I really, really think that's a wonderful way to view it. Provide that continuity for your shared path users, because it's much, much easier for vehicles to have to slow down and give way than it is for riders to have to slow down and give way. It's just cumbersome, and some riders may try their luck and others may be like, well, I'm just going to use the road because this is too inconvenient. So I've got 2 other examples here of shared paths crossing over roads. And this one here, I'll just call example number 1 on the left. Example number 2 on the right. I prefer example number 1. They're both raised crossings. They both give priority to shared path users. But my preference is example number 1. And I'd like to hear in the chat as to why you think I would be recommending number 1 configuration over number 2. So in the chat, I'll give you 30 seconds. Have a look at both of these examples and pop down your thoughts as to what could be considered more or less risky in either of these. 30 seconds. Catherine.
Hello. While that's all happening, Max, there's a real pet peeve of mine on
Ooh.
option 1.
Tell me.
It's the overlapping of the signs. I hate that so much.
Really?
Yeah, the supplementary sign overlapping the give way sign.
There you go. They
I
haven't done that
always,
in the second example.
no, I don't know why I get so mad at that. Anyway.
Yeah.
Oh.
Each to their own.
Each to their own. I do get stuck into that stuff in a road safety audit. I do pick that up. But it's always a to note though. I don't go too crazy on risk rating it.
I thought you'd bring a little screwdriver on your site inspections and start just shifting those
Yes.
things down.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah. Cheers.
Good to have that feedback. And so yeah, the way that things look, 2 different jurisdictions, as I mentioned before. The one on the left is from Victoria. The one on the right is the Brisbane Bicentennial Bikeway. So yeah, 2 different states doing different coloured treatments and things like that. So I wasn't focusing so much on that. But Marissa, we'll give a prize out. I saw it mentioned multiple times to the 4th person who mentioned the sightline restrictions associated with example 2. The reason I'm saying the 4th person is just for those that are perhaps a little bit slower at typing. Doesn't mean you can't win a prize. So don't worry, we haven't forgotten you. So the reason that I think that is so important to note is in example 1, our conflict points is very, very close to perpendicular. And when we have that kind of arrangement, it's actually a very handy thing for sight lines, because the rider can make eye contact with a motorist that is yielding or not yielding. So there's that ability to be able to look at each other and see, okay, they're not going to give way. I need to, emergency brake or get off this path. In example number 2, if you were riding along this path and you get to about this point here, you basically need to turn your neck, a pretty significant angle to your right to be able to see oncoming vehicles. Of course, in a perfect world, you'd have 100% compliance to the give way and all motorists would be stopping. But that's not exactly how the world functions. And so we still want to provide that opportunity where we are ensuring that we've got that sight line being adhered to, and that opportunity for riders to be able to make eye contact with motorists. So I'll actually show you another photo of what this path looks like, a closer example. And you can see at this location, you do have quite a lot of, bicycle tread marks there, indicating that perhaps there is lots of emergency braking going on at this because motorists aren't yielding, and cyclists are forced to then slam on their brakes. So if you are able to, construct your conflict points at perpendicular angles and really open up those sight lines, that's definitely the recommended, the go-to. Now, I'm not trying to throw any shade at all to Brisbane or this bike path. I know this one quite well, and they've done lots of exciting things. And I know in this particular environment that they are, they've got lots of different constraints. So I didn't want to say that, this is the worst thing ever and you just can never do this. I just wanted to show why those sight lines can play into how effective these type of treatments are. But they both principally do the same thing of awarding priority to shared path users. Okay, now another thing that we commonly see where we do have shared paths crossing over roads is, of course, bollards. Bollards are fixed hazards that are placed on the shared path or adjacent to the shared path to deter vehicle entry. There's lots of different configurations out there as to what bollards may look like. Where you've got really tight restrictions like this, they tend to be installed where municipalities, LGAs can be concerned about, things like monkey bikes or dirt bikes entering that environment. My kind of response to that is an occurrence that could happen X number of times per year, whereas this fixed hazard is present 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, every day of that year. And we should be treating these as hazards because we do know that riders collide with them. We do know that they injure themselves, they take themselves to hospital, and we also know that they are underreported. So we don't know the full story of how much, personal injury is occurring due to things like this. But we should be considering them as just like any other hazard that we would. We wouldn't install a utility pole there, so we should have a think about that as well. Anyway, just some general principles that I like to talk about at this stage. And one is, if you've determined bollards are necessary, don't install them the same color as the surrounding environment. In this one, we've got gray on gray, and during low light conditions, or it's drizzly in Melbourne at this location, they just disappear. Like, they are so well camouflaged. And the other thing that I really dislike about these ones in particular is they are well and truly away from the carriageway. So the reasons these have been installed is to limit maintenance vehicles. So maintenance vehicles don't go any further. So they can come and pick up a bin that's located over here, but they don't go any further. And I just think a much more elegant solution is just, rather than have these installed here, just talk to the contractor that's doing this and just ensure they've got in their swims or, how they operate their standard practices, that they're not traveling beyond their scope, or even geofence their vehicles so they're unable to access any further. Like, we've got this technology. But anyway, the bollards seem to be a really, really common way just to quickly put up and, job done. Banana bars in Brisbane, they, as far as I'm aware, are being ripped up. They're no longer being installed, and they're getting taken away because of the kind of pinch point awkwardness there for riders. Not a great outcome at all. Few other types of bollard treatments, things like timber bollards. Once again, you've got that, blending in with the surrounding environment. You've got this type of treatment, which is kind of I forgot the word. If anyone knows the word for it, you get a prize immediately. It's the chicane. Thank you. We'll give a prize for all of those. That's excellent. Chicane type of treatment, which does a really, really good job at slowing down riders, and making them aware that they're coming up to a carriageway. Does a wonderful job at preventing that vehicle entry. The issue that I've seen with the installation of these chicane treatments is sometimes they can be quite narrow, as in like the gap in between those two transverse kind of bars there. And for those who use cargo bikes, or you've got bikes with a trailer and you ride with your toddler or your pet dog or whatever it is, those kind of larger bikes can actually have difficulties traveling through these types of things. So it's just something to be mindful of. And another common one, this one's in Hobart, is the use of U-bollards, kind of once again just indicating that riders are coming up to a carriageway and to be mindful, but also creating this pretty awkward pinch point. And yeah, anyway, I wanted to just put into a bit of context why I'm talking about bollards so much. And this is a photo of a bollard that was installed on the Upfield bike path, which is right near our office. This was many years ago now, or 4 years ago now. And that was what it looked like prior to this fellow riding into it. After he rode into it, a few days later, council went out and gave it a fresh paint job and gave it some new tape. You can even see the fresh paint on the pavement there. Anyway, Andrew here, he rode into this bollard on his way home from work, and he had suffered facial injuries and broke his arm in 3 places. And as he was waiting for the ambulance, he called an ambulance to get urgent treatment. As he was waiting, took about 40 minutes, he witnessed 3 other riders hit that same bollard in that period. And we have a police report for that one crash because that rider went to hospital. So we do have a record of that occurring. Those other crashes we do not know occurred other than anecdotally. And I think that kind of paints the picture of that these are actually hazards. We would never, ever put fixed hazards in the middle of traffic lanes and just be like, you should have seen it. But we kind of have got that philosophy on our shared path network, and we should be thinking a little bit more principle-based of, is this really the correct solution? And what's the risk of putting it there versus not putting it there and potentially having a vehicle access that space? Now, other alternatives that you could look at is something that looks like this. And I welcome any submissions that you may have that generally look like this arrangement. And this is very much similar to how we would treat a local road that is approaching a main arterial road. And that's installing a humble splitter island. So you could use landscaping, or you could even put a bollard in that central island treatment, assuming you've got those half-meter clearances and things like that. This provides a very, very distinct visual cue to riders that something is occurring, particularly if you've got line marking running up in advance of that potential conflict. It also does a very, very good job of ensuring that vehicles are not entering that space. And it's using landscaping as opposed to just using a big metal pole right in the middle of the path. So big fan of this. This has been in the Austroads guide for, I'm going to say 15 years or something like that. I struggle to get really, really good examples of this actually being applied in practice. So if you do know of any, please send me an email. I've got this one, which is kind of doing what I'm talking about here, but yeah, to some extent not, which is using a bit of grass to help demarcate those two different legs of the shared path, so you don't just have riders in opposing directions riding into each other. It is using bollards, but managing to maintain that half-meter offset, so reducing the risk of handlebars striking that or anything like that. The other reason that I really like these bollards is they've actually got a solar panel on the top of them, and when the sun sets at night, then they illuminate and then they cast a lot of light, so it's very easy to see both during the day and at night. So I think that's a pretty sensible solution. The reason why I'm not so convinced about this one is because if I was a vehicle and I really wanted to access that space, I could quite easily just go around that kind of stuff. But anyway, if you do know other examples, please do shoot me an email. I just wanted to mention also about our DDA requirements. So DDA, for those unfamiliar, the Disability Discrimination Act is ensuring that because we're working within the public realm and we are ensuring that we're not discriminating against anyone with disabilities, people with vision impairments, people in wheelchairs, all of those requirements are still applicable to our shared path network. And so we need to consider those things as we are designing and constructing our shared path network. So in particular, what you may be thinking about is TGSIs. We may be installing them on approach to the conflict point. So the TGSIs are just those little hazard markers. So people with vision impairments or blinds, they can feel like the braille as they approach the conflict point. Those types of requirements are still necessary. So just wanted to make everyone aware of that one. Okay, now I've got another little segment where you've got a chance to contribute and a chance to win a prize. And it is a little game that we like to play, which is called What's Wrong with This Photo? And you can see I've got a very confused looking cyclist there. I might get her out of the way though, so you can have a closer look. And in the chats, I want you to write down what you think is wrong with this photo. I'll give you 30 seconds. While that's coming through, I might check in with Catherine if I've got any questions.
Hello, I'm trying to busily answer them, and there's a couple that came through just as you asked, Max, so good timing.
Oh, good.
So should chicane radius approach be used for shared use paths to reduce speed on approach to roads, even with priority crossings? Some practitioners feel it improves safety.
Great question. That is, let's give a prize out there. So that is,
Thanks, Joe.
if a rider is approaching a carriageway, a conflict point, should we be actually installing those chicanes to physically slow down riders so that they are not just crossing at speed and assume that they're given right of way? And unfortunately, I don't have a uniform response. I do believe there are merits in certain situations to deliberately provide that. Could be, in a downhill environment where it's easy for riders to pick up speed and just fly across there, and the sight lines are terrible and all these types of things. That's when you may be doing it. But I wouldn't suggest that at every single location we should be doing chicanes, because we do want to continue to provide that continuous connected journey for riders. And the more that you make them do those annoying movements, the less attractive that facility is. So definitely on a case-by-case basis, but good question.
Yeah, certainly. I had a question from earlier, which I'm also interested to know. It's around the fencing, so pedestrian fencing versus guardrail. So what triggers what type of fence, Max?
Good question. So if you were building adjacent a carriageway, depending on the speed and volumes and things like that, you may need to make a decision as to, whether there is a requirement to contain errant vehicles. Of course, from a safe system principle level, you would absolutely be recommending that, because you don't want an errant vehicle to be interacting with that shared path. You want to be making that completely protected from that carriageway. The other risk that you do is if you're installing the cycle-friendly fencing or the pedestrian fencing, is that continuous deflection smooth rail that I talked about before. If that gets too close to the carriageway, that can then act as a spearing hazard. So it's pretty unlikely that you'd be installing that feature close to the edge of the carriageway, because if a driver loses control, there's a risk that that feature comes off the brackets and doesn't do good things.
Yeah, for sure. I have a couple of questions, couple more.
Go for it.
Do we have specific standards or limitation for landscaping? And I guess that goes to what we were talking about earlier around treating the management of vehicles and slowing vehicles down at those entry points.
Yeah, and it comes back to things like those sightline calculations and things like that. Just doing those principle-based checks and trying to make a decision of how big the vegetation is going to get. Is that going to create any sightline issues, or is it going to overgrow the path and things like that?
Great, thank you. All good. Continue on.
Right. Okay, lots of similar ideas there. And Marissa, I'll give a prize out to the 6th person this time that mentioned wayfinding signage. So that is simply just putting a sign here. So as you approach this fork, you know which way is which. This is a real example of where I was riding and I had no idea which way to go, and I had to get off my bike and check my maps and take a little angry photo and then put it into this course and make this little slide so I can get very upset about it. But such a simple thing to put a sign there and just say, this way goes to the station, this way to the library, and something that we do not do incredibly well within our jurisdictions. But the other very, very relevant topic that I saw coming through there is the lack of clarity around who has priority. And just to demonstrate what that means for those unfamiliar, if I said that this was the main route or the main thoroughfare, then what you would ideally do is you'd actually try and square up this intersection so it looks more like this, and then you'd fill in this section here. And you'd put a stop sign there that faces shared path users in that direction. So it's very clear that if you're riding on this path, you've got right of way. And if you're coming up the other direction, you need to stop or give way, whatever the sign is, yield to shared path users on the adjacent path. Very good point. But the wayfinding I wanted to mention in particular, because Austroads have actually completed a research report on that topic specifically, acknowledging that Australia and New Zealand, we've got a bit of work to do in that space, and there's other jurisdictions that we can learn from. This is just one way that wayfinding can be provided. It's by no means rocket science or anything too groundbreaking. It's some clear identification that this is for riders, so the use of the bicycle symbol, provision of distances or even time. It's going to take you 10 minutes to ride here, as well as those locations. Now, this is, as I said, a very, very simple kind of treatment, but unfortunately something that is regularly forgotten or not prioritized as part of our shared path networks. This example here on the left is from Copenhagen, and just to show you how they do things over there. Route number 2, that travels from the main shopping center all the way to their central station. So you know that if you're on route number 2, you're on the right path. It's very easy to see numbers. You don't need to translate that. Very, very intelligent way of doing things. Similarly, within the Netherlands on the right-hand side, they use a combination of both numbering their routes as well as colors. So you can quickly identify which path you're meant to be on and how long it's going to take you to get to certain places. So just put that in there for a bit of food for thought if you're working on any of these types of projects. Now, the other thing that we need to consider is where we do have shared paths crossing over other shared paths or other pedestrianised areas, how do we actually slow down our riders to ensure that they're not just belting through there at 30 kilometers per hour and potentially causing a lot of uncomfortable scenarios for pedestrians, people just walking along or colliding with other riders in the opposite direction. This is actually an example, quite an interesting example in Perth. This is at City West train station. Shout out to Catherine there, probably where you used to go after high school and go to the shopping centre there or something. But this is an example of where riders are being really encouraged to slow down, because as they're riding through here and approaching the train station, you've got this little, I always forget what this term is called, but like pedestrian boom gate kind of scenario, where when it's closed, you've got all this volume of pedestrians just waiting to cross, and then as soon as it opens up, you get this flood of pedestrian traffic all going in this direction as well. And so you really, really want to slow down riders prior to that conflict point. The way that they've engineered it here over in Perth is they've used some curb and channel, done some splitter islands, coloured the pavement, they've done a little give way pavement marking as well. All of these features are really designed to enhance cyclists' appreciation that something's changing about this environment. Like, this does not look like the other parts of the network, and I should alter my behavior accordingly. I think another way that this perhaps could have been managed is through the use of a wombat crossing. So actually raising up this area here. It's quite crudely drawn. But kind of like a speed hump, I guess. So riders, hit this ramp grade, and that physically slows them down. And then as pedestrians access this space, you've got riders traveling at a lower speed. Wombat crossings are used across bike paths. So I've got examples of that if you're interested in seeing it, and can be used on shared paths as well. Another way that we tend to see this conflict points being demarcated or just being acknowledged is through the use of different pavement markings. So this slow down, like pedestrians are going to be in this space. I have not seen any research about how effective these types of treatments are. And I wouldn't expect they do a great deal, because by the time a rider actually sees these types of things, they're already on top of it, and likely too late for them to actually slow down or do anything, or they're traveling at speed and it's just another, distraction and not really processed. So I think it looks like that, there's some kind of effort being made, but I would be surprised to hear if they're actually doing any type of, if there's any change in behavior or change in rider speeds, installing things like that. But if you know otherwise and you've got some data, feel free to correct me. That's right.
I was laughing when you made that mention of me knowing that area, Max. But yeah, it's certainly busy in the peak times. So in the morning and afternoon when people are going to and from their workplaces. But yeah, I guess certain people would see that as being over-engineered. But there certainly needs to be some clarity around who has priority, because at those, as I say, those peak times, it's pretty hectic. So yeah.
Bringing back memories, huh?
Yes, certainly is. Also, it was just a bit of, sorry, Max, to interrupt. There was just a bit of a mention around using, I guess, like tactile pavement, which creates that vibration as you roll over, as I guess a bit of advance warning for cyclists. I know that tends to get used.
It's a good question. I'll pop in a slide in our next module where I'll show an example of that, because I tend to be more favouring of that kind of solution than just this kind of pavement marking. I think that can provide a very clear warning to riders that they're approaching a different environment.
Definitely. Thanks, Max.
Thank you. So that is the end of the content for today. I just wanted to touch on the LMS, and appropriately, I thought I'd close on this shared path as well, where it's just a shared path end sign. Not really fulfilling the needs of the riding community just by putting the end sign there. As you can clearly see, there's obviously a demand for continued facilities throughout this location. So just to have a bit of that strategic thinking about where you are ending your shared path network. Ideally, you want to connect it into other networks or connect it into significant attractions. Could be to bus interchanges, train stations, things like that. So they've got a way to then take the next part of their journey and not just ending at an arterial road where things are a bit too hard now to start building more of this shared path. So I just wanted to mention that one as well. But I'll spend the last bit of this session going through the LMS. You can, of course, continue to ask your questions in the chat. This is what the LMS looks like. For those who have already said hello in the introduction, it's great to see such an enthusiastic bunch, and encourage you to also say hello and share your photos of you riding, or also a professional corporate headshot of you as well. That's also welcome. It's nice just to hear who we've got online. So just a chance to say hello. We've got resources, course information, reference documents and resources, everything that we mention within our modules where we provide that source is in there. So you don't need to, trouble Google too much. We've already collated that for you. I just bulk download that whole folder. It's really useful. safecycling.org.au is the website that Stuart mentioned at the start of today. It's the Amy Gillett Foundation program website. Global Designing Cities Initiative, that's where you get that fancy book that I spoke about before. That was the video that GDCI sent us as well. You're welcome to watch that. It's not part of the coursework, but if you're interested. If you've got any specific resources that you think would be relevant for other participants, by all means, you can just upload it in this section here. You may have a specific way that you sign your shared path networks. You've got wayfinding signage that's been embedded in a strategy or in a guidance document, and it's good to share that with others. By all means, you're welcome to do that. But under this Module 1 tab is where you will see the content that we've gone through to today. This link here, which is VR 360-degree video Module 1 shared path. And if I click on that, it opens up to another page. And then I click on that link. And what it actually does is it takes you to a 360-degree video. Now, if you've never used this, that's completely fine. It's the exact same as Google Street View. So you can click on the image and then drag it, and you'll be able to spin it around and see the environment in 360. And this is Ken and I, Ken with his mustache, you can see the mustache, having a bit of a chat around cycling infrastructure. And we're actually looking at some different examples of cycling. So just to show you what this is like, this is riding across a raised crossing here. And if you wanted to pause it, you can do that. Oh. Anyway, have a look at things like that. So we'll get you to watch this video prior to our next session, just so that we've got your feedback and we know that that's working, and we'll provide just a quick poll question to cover off any of that. The other task that you'll need to complete is a quiz. So you click on this, pretty straightforward. It'll take you to the quiz questions. You've got 3 attempts. If you're not getting the answers correct, or not sure why you're not getting them correct, reach out. We'll be sure to give you a hand. Other than that, that's it from me. I also just wanted to mention, if you come to our next module just a few minutes early, we like to run some trivia. And it's not like traffic engineering trivia or anything too detailed, so don't be stressed. It's just a general trivia and chance to win a prize. So log on early, and we can get you geared up for some trivia.
Yes, yes, absolutely.
Traffic engineering. Traffic engineering trivia.
Oh yeah. Oh, some
Yeah.
people love it. Some people relish that opportunity, but yeah, not everyone.
I'll come late that session. No, just joking.
Some people are asking about the recording. Yes, the recordings for each of the modules are uploaded onto the learning management system shortly. It takes a couple of hours to process just as we finish. So a couple of hours after the session ends, they will be available on the LMS for you to watch back at any time. And we've got lots of people saying yes to traffic engineering trivia. Bring it on.
Sorry, everyone. I'm the minority. Maybe we should change the moderator for the next session.
So that's good to have
More of a
diversity.
90s pop trivia. Yeah.
Excellent.
Thanks
Well,
everyone for joining, and thanks, Matt.
thanks for all your questions. Thanks for the moderating, and we look forward to the trivia and getting stuck into our next modules. Enjoy your day.
Thank you, everyone.
See you then.
Bye.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.